Second thing is this. One of my great friends is a man called Tom Hyland. I've known him for over 30 years. And Tom got enthusiasms from time to time. And one time he heard classical music and it wasn't enough just to listen to the records, he wanted to become a composer. And then one evening, he'd lost his job on the buses because he couldn't handle the traffic. So he was an unemployed bus driver living out in Ballyfermot. And he and his neighbours were watching television. They saw a film by John Pilger about the massacre of East Timorese students in the graveyard in Dili, in East Timor, by the Indonesians. And he was outraged, couldn't sleep. The next day, he led some of his neighbours into central Dublin, and they went round the offices scrounging paper, pencils, old Roneo reproduction equipment, all this sort of stuff and so on. Founded the East Timor Ireland Solidarity Campaign, whose home was in his own house, 210 Lefania Road, Ballyfermot in Dublin. He was flown in secretly to meet with Shanana Gusmao in the prison. And I was thrilled when I heard on the BBC World Service Professor Peter Carey, the Professor of Oriental Studies in the University of Oxford, saying in his cut-glass English tones, "Of course, when one considers the downfall of Suharto and his regime, one must acknowledge the significant role played by Tom Hyland of Ballyfermot in Dublin." I'd never heard Ballyfermot pronounced like that in my life. I was always Ballyfermot, do you know what I mean? So, anyway, it was great. And Tom was bleeding marvellous, because you get Tom into Ivy House, and I won't use in front of the cameras the kind of language he used, because he cut through all the crap, all the red tape, all the hypocritical evasion, and he got down to the human issues, because it's always the ordinary human people, just as in this bloody economic mess, you're paying for the gambling habits of the banks. And the people who started it all, the ratings agencies, they're utterly without shame. It's not just an Irish, it's an international problem. This all started in America with the subprime mortgages, and they were AAA rated by these buggers, and they were involved in selling them on. They were utterly criminally corrupt, in my opinion. And they got Enron wrong. They got Iceland a week before Iceland went down the drain. They gave it a 3-star rating, and we're still letting them get away with it. I mean, imagine the impertinence of these bloody people. Last year they said we should have a general election, get rid of the government. Last week they were telling us that the opposition had to support the government. Who elected them? Discredited, not ever able to get it right, and deeply complicit in the mess. And we're still letting them get away with it. And as a result of their prattlings, our interest rates in the international bond market have gone up to 6.25% or 7%. Something outrageous. And we're so stupid, we're not even allowing our own pension fund under the National Treasury Management, I forget how many billion, we're not allowing it to invest in our own bonds. Idiocy. And the other thing, in case we don't get to it, Shell to Sea. I'm bloody glad I was the lone voice in Shanadair and supporting them. The Rossport 5, Shell to Sea and all. And I got blackguarded over, and I was told that this was all a collection of mad shinners and Irigi this and doodah and whatnot and dissident Republicans and so on. It doesn't make an idea wrong, because unpleasant people support it, and you can't frighten people away in that. When I refuse to, and I tell you this, it's a bloody funny deal that Shell Oil got all that for nothing, courtesy of Mr. Ray Burke when he was minister. And do you know that they have now quantified the yield from the Corrib Basin that Shell Oil have? Do you know how much it is over the lifetime? No, our yield is zero. Shell are going to get 500 billion euros. Now just think about that figure. That is 10 times our entire exposure to the banks if every bank in the country failed. Why don't we get it back? Why don't we renegotiate? Putin did it in Russia. He just tore it up and renegotiated. I think we should do that. You know, they play hardball with us. It's about time we played hardball with
There's that
with
whole
them.
relationship with big business thing, though, isn't there, that our government
Yes.
appear to have, which prevents us from doing a Putin and tearing it all up.
Of course it does, but they'll only respect you more. And I mean, I remember this is the stuff we got when, with the help of Mary O'Rourke, and thank God for her, she was great in the Senate. I mean, I know people, there's a general anti-Fianna Fáil thing at the moment, and I was never close to Fianna Fáil, but I think, to tell you this, there are decent people in every single party, including Fianna Fáil. Every party has them, including the Shinners, the ones that sentenced me to death for being a fairy 30 years ago. And now I'm sitting next to one of them in the Senate, and a thoroughly decent, another left-wing loony, Piers Doherty. Great fellow. And I agree with, and he's on board as far as this Shell thing is concerned as well. You know, and when you think 14 million was what you paid for overtime for the guards to protect Shell, while they were breaking every EU environmental code.
Well, they did it quite enthusiastically from what we've heard, their protection.
They did. And I think it's terrible because it's bad for our police force, who are, by and large, excellent, decent, good people. So there are an awful lot of things like that I think we should clear up.
David, during the 1980s, you would probably have been considered the only gay man in Ireland.
Yes.
Things have changed slightly now, and I think people are more comfortable sort of being open about their sexuality. But I think it was last weekend, it might have been the weekend before, I met somebody that I know who is gay, and we were kind of just having a conversation about a particular item of clothing that he was wearing. I was wearing a Superman T-shirt, and he was wearing a Batman T-shirt, but the Batman insignia was in kind of sequins on the front. And he commented on the fact that he had a belt to match it, but he said, I never wear the belt. And I said, well, why not? He said, because it gets me beaten up. And I just laughed. I said, but get out of it. You know, and he said, no, seriously, he said, I've been beaten up twice in this particular town that we were in. And on the first occasion, it was wearing this ensemble together. And I said that I was angry. I said, that is absolutely awful. And he said, well, he was kind of quite philosophical about it, you know, sort of stuff happens. And, you know, he just laughed and went on about his business. And it made me think, the perception that we have is that you know, that being gay is now just widely accepted and everything is easy, and in some walks of life it's even fashionable, you know, even desirable. But that's not really the case, is it? Things have gone forward, but in many ways they've stayed the same. Well,
there's been a remarkable transition. I mean, let's start with the positive. Throughout my adolescence and young manhood, it was a criminal matter. You know, I could have gone to jail quite easily, and you know, people forget that. And I saw people going to jail. And when we started the gay movement, I ran various sections, including a legal section where we used to represent people in court. And I've seen situations where people were sent to jail or forcibly sent to psychiatrists. And in some cases, people were subjected to involuntary sessions of electric shock treatment, ECT, and all this kind of stuff. So we've moved to that from a point where I was a criminal, simply for being myself, to where I'm now being considered as a possible candidate for the presidency of Ireland. I mean, that in my life, in my experience, is a huge thing. But I've also known, as I pointed out in the debate, because there were some very mean-minded attempts to amend the Civil Partnership Bill in order to introduce apartheid. You know, really, that people who had conscientious objection to homosexuality could refuse to serve gay people in shops. And in terms of counselling services, if they had an ethical objection, they could withdraw their counselling services from a same-sex couple if the relationship, this is the word in the amendment, if the use of the counselling service would serve to perpetuate the relationship. I mean, have these people ever read the Bible? They obviously don't know the first thing about Christianity. I mean, the Good Samaritan parable, where Christ tells a story about this man who is from a completely different ethos, a Samaritan, and he crosses the road to bind up the wounds of the man who was injured, the Jewish who was injured.